The morning mist clung to the valley like a ghost that refused to fade. Between the whispering pines, the sound of breaking branches shattered the silence. A mother bear was digging with desperate fury. Her massive paws, once instruments of power and grace, now trembled with exhaustion. Beneath her, a hollow pit yawned where an ancient tree had fallen during the last storm, its roots torn from the frozen ground. Somewhere deep in that darkness came the soft, terrified cries of her cub, the only one she had left. For 2 endless days, she had clawed at the frozen earth, her roars echoing across the mountains, unanswered. The ground was slick with melted snow and streaked with her blood. Every strike of her claws drew more pain. Every moment of rest felt like betrayal. She could hear the faint whimpering beneath the soil, weaker now, fading. The cub had fallen when the ground collapsed beneath their den, swallowed by the tangled maze of roots and rocks. She had tried everything her instincts could conjure, digging from one side, tearing through branches, even using her massive body to push at the earth. But nature had built a trap stronger than any predator. Her fur, once gleaming bronze beneath the sun, was now darkened with mud and streaked with crimson. Her breath came in ragged bursts, visible in the cold morning air. Hunger gnawed at her belly, yet she refused to leave the spot. Each hour dragged her closer to despair. The forest, once her realm, now felt alien and cruel. She had fought off a pack of wolves the previous night, driven not by strength but by madness born of fear. Now her muscles screamed in agony, her claws cracked and splintered from endless struggle. Still she dug. Still she roared. Still she refused to surrender. The scent of spring drifted through the wind. The thaw was coming, melting the last of the mountain snow. Somewhere far below, rivers were awakening, carrying with them the promise of new life. But for the mother bear, life had narrowed to a single heartbeat, the faint rhythm beneath the soil that matched her own. As the sun broke through the mist, a golden light spilled across her battered form. She paused, chest heaving, listening. Silence. Then, a faint, broken cry. It was enough. With renewed fury, she drove her claws into the ground again, tearing at roots and stones until her paws bled freely. The pain meant nothing now. Only the sound mattered, because in that fragile voice beneath the earth lived everything she was, her purpose, her soul, her reason to fight one breath longer against the indifferent face of nature. By the third morning, the mountain stirred beneath heavy clouds. The air smelled of rain and iron, and thunder rolled faintly over the peaks. The mother bear's world had become a blur of mud, pain, and fading hope. Her claws could no longer pierce the frozen ground, and her roars had turned hoarse, carried away by the wind like broken prayers. The cub's cries were now barely whispers, so faint that each pause between them felt like a knife through her heart. She pressed her face to the earth, listening. Nothing. Then, faintly, a whimper, weak but alive. Her heart surged. The sound rekindled something fierce within her chest, a pulse of defiance that refused to die. She lowered her body against the soil, as if her warmth alone could reach the cub below. But warmth was no longer enough. The roots were too thick, the ground too deep. Her strength, her claws, her will, all had failed her. For the first time, fear gave way to something deeper, realization. She could not save her cub alone. The storm gathering above the mountains would soon flood the valley, drowning the hollow that trapped her baby. Time was slipping away like water through her paws. Through the dense forest came a scent she recognized, one she had learned to fear since her first encounter with humankind. Smoke, metal, gun oil. It carried on the wind like a warning. The human scent. Her instinct screamed for retreat. Every story written in her blood told her that humans meant death. The scars across her flank, old and pale beneath her fur, whispered of hunts survived and traps escaped. But now, with her cub's fading cries echoing in her ears, that ancient fear clashed with something far stronger, love. She turned her head toward the ridge, nostrils flaring. The wind carried the faint clang of metal, a human sound, foreign and deliberate. A cabin, perhaps. A hunter. Her muscles tensed, torn between fight and flight. Yet as lightning cracked across the gray sky, she made her choice. With one final glance at the sunken ground, she rose, slow, deliberate, trembling from exhaustion. Her paws left bloody prints in the softening earth as she began her descent through the mist. The forest watched in silence as its fiercest guardian broke every rule of instinct and survival, leaving her cub behind to seek help from the very creatures she had spent her life avoiding. Each step forward felt like betrayal. She could still hear the muffled cries behind her, but the distance grew with every heartbeat. The path downward was steep, scattered with loose stones slick from melting snow. Once she slipped, crashing against a fallen tree. Pain exploded through her shoulder, but she rose again. There was no time to stop. The scent of human grew stronger. Beneath it came another smell, smoke from fire. Somewhere below, a cabin stood at the forest's edge, its chimney curling pale trails into the darkening sky. The first drops of rain began to fall as the mother bear reached the clearing. Her heart thundered in her chest. Somewhere inside that wooden shelter, a man was moving, the faint rhythm of footsteps against the floorboards. She took one breath, deep and trembling, and stepped from the shadows into the open clearing. The storm broke above her. Lightning split the sky, thunder roared through the mountains, and the mother bear, drenched, bloodied, and trembling, raised her head toward the cabin. If she could not save her cub, perhaps a human could. The rain fell harder now, turning the clearing into a mosaic of ripples and mud. The mother bear stood motionless at the edge of the trees, her breath misting in the cold air. Each drop that struck her first stung like a spark against open wounds. The world around her blurred, but she could see the faint glow from the cabin window, warm, flickering, human. Inside, she could sense movement. Shadows passed before the firelight, and faintly she heard a man's voice, low, rhythmic, a sound unlike the chaos of the wild. Instinct screamed for her to run. Every heartbeat pounded a single message, danger. But beneath that primal terror was another pulse, softer, deeper, a whisper that belonged only to a mother. My cub. She stepped forward. The wet ground gave way beneath her weight with a soft, sucking sound. The smell of smoke and iron grew stronger. Somewhere beneath it, she caught the scent of something else, cooked meat. Her stomach twisted painfully. She hadn't eaten in days, not since the fall that trapped her cub. The hunger roared within her, but she forced it down. There was no room for instinct now. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the clearing for a heartbeat. The hunter appeared in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, a rifle slung across his chest. His eyes met hers across the storm, and for a moment, time froze. Predator and prey. The oldest story in the world. He raised his weapon halfway, hesitating. The mother bear didn't move. She kept her head low, her massive body trembling beneath the rain. Her wounds glistened in the stormlight, deep gashes across her shoulders, blood mixing with water to form thin crimson streams that trickled down her legs. The hunter hesitated, lowering his rifle slightly. Something about her stance wasn't right. Bears didn't freeze like this. They charged or they fled. But this one, this battered creature, simply stood as if rooted to the earth by pain and desperation. He called out, voice firm but uncertain, a warning in a language she couldn't understand. She responded with a low, broken moan, not the growl of threat, but something closer to sorrow. The sound carried across the clearing like a wound, made audible. The hunter took a step forward, the rain dripping from his hat brim. Easy now, he murmured, his tones softening despite himself. Easy, girl. Another flash of lightning revealed the truth of her condition. The bear was gaunt, her ribs faintly visible beneath her soaked fur. She was no hunter tonight. She was broken, exhausted, and on the edge of collapse. Then she did something that made the man's breath catch in his throat. She sat, slowly, heavily, like a creature surrendering to something greater than fear. Her head bowed low, her front paws splayed in the mud. It wasn't an attack posture. It was pleading. For several heartbeats, the hunter stood in stunned silence. Rain drummed against his hat, against the rifle, against the tin roof behind him. He had seen bears before, too many, in fact, but none like this. Then she made a sound that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A deep, trembling whine that rose into a mournful cry, the kind a mother makes when calling her lost young. The man's grip on his rifle loosened. Something inside him shifted, an old hunter's instinct replaced by empathy he hadn't felt in years. He lowered his weapon completely, stepping out into the rain. "Where's your cub?" he whispered, though he knew she couldn't understand. But the bear did respond. She rose again, limping toward the far side of the clearing, pausing every few steps to look back at him. The rain washed streaks of blood from her fur, marking her path like a trail of sacrifice. The hunter frowned, uncertainty in his eyes. Every instinct warned him to retreat, yet curiosity, or perhaps compassion, rooted him in place. She stopped, turned her massive head toward him, and let out another low, urgent moan, softer now but insistent. It was not a warning. It was an invitation. He took a step forward, then another. When he did, the bear moved too, slowly, carefully, limping toward the shadowed trail that led into the forest. Each time he paused, she turned, waiting. By the time they reached the edge of the trees, the rain had softened to a mist. The hunter could barely see through the fog, but her shape moved ahead like a ghost made of earth and sorrow. For a moment, he hesitated, glancing back at his cabin, his fire, his safety. Then the faintest sound reached his ears, a whimper. Distant, muffled, but unmistakably young. He tightened his grip on his axe, his breath visible in the cold air, and followed her into the dark. Above them, thunder rumbled once more, echoing through the valley as if the mountain itself bore witness to their fragile, impossible alliance. The climb back up the mountain was slow and brutal. The rain had softened the ground into slippery clay that clung to boots and paws alike. The hunter followed the mother bear in silence, his breath shallow, his axe balanced loosely in one hand. The fog wrapped around them like a living thing, muting every sound except the steady crunch of snow melt beneath their feet. Ahead, the bear moved with a kind of haunted grace, each limp a reminder of what she had endured, each glance back at him a question. "Will you keep coming?" He did, not because it was safe, but because he couldn't bear not to. By the time they reached the ridge, the storm had begun to fade. Thin strands of sunlight broke through the clouds, turning the wet world silver. The air smelled of earth and pine sap, of new beginnings that hadn't yet arrived. The bear halted near a mound of collapsed soil and twisted roots. The ground there looked freshly disturbed. The hunter felt it before he saw it, the faint, desperate sound coming from beneath the roots. A cub, still alive. The bear gave a low rumble, half warning, half plea. She backed away several paces, her chest heaving, her golden eyes locked on the man. The hunter crouched near the pit, resting his axe beside him. The soil was unstable, a narrow funnel dropping into shadow. He brushed away the surface debris and called softly, though he knew the cub wouldn't understand words. The answering whimper was faint but real. He turned toward the mother. "I'll try," he whispered, "but you got to trust me." She didn't move. Every muscle in her body quivered, caught between instinct and hope. The hunter took it as permission. He began to dig. At first, the mud resisted him, slick and heavy with rainwater. He used his hands, then the axe head, prying free the tangled roots. Each swing sent shards of wood flying. The sound made the mother flinch. Once she rose to her hind legs, a guttural growl tearing from her throat. He froze, heart hammering. Their eyes met, one filled with fear of death, the other with the terror of losing everything. He nodded once, slow and deliberate, and lowered his head back to the work. Minutes blurred into an hour. The pit widened. The man's breath came ragged, his fingers numb. Blood from scraped knuckles mixed with the dark soil. The bear paced behind him in tight circles, unable to stay still. Whenever the cub whimpered, she stopped, uttering a soft, throaty hum that seemed to settle both of them. Finally, the axe hit something solid. Wood. The fallen root that pinned the cub in place. He wedged the blade beneath it and heaved with everything he had. The root shifted, groaned, but didn't break. He tried again, teeth clenched. Mud splattered his face, his arms burned. On the third heave, the root gave way with a crack. A small dark shape scrambled upward, squealing. The cub burst from the opening like a heartbeat returning to life. Wet, shivering, and covered in mud, it stumbled toward the light, toward its mother. The hunter barely had time to move before the mother bear lunged forward. She didn't strike. She didn't roar. She swept the cub into her embrace with astonishing gentleness, pulling it close against her chest. The cub nuzzled her, crying weakly. The sound broke something in the man, a wall he hadn't realized he'd built around his heart years ago when the world had grown too cruel. He stumbled backward, collapsing onto the damp earth, chest heaving. The bear turned toward him, her eyes shining with something that was not gratitude as a human would know it, but recognition. The raw understanding that he had given her what she could not reclaim alone. For a long moment, neither moved. Rain dripped from the branches above, the only sound between them. Then, slowly, the mother bear lowered her head. It wasn't submission nor thanks. It was something older, acknowledgement between two beings who had risked everything for life. The hunter rose unsteadily. His hands trembled as he reached for his axe, more from exhaustion than fear. The bear didn't flinch. She kept her cub pressed against her belly, eyes following his every move. When he stepped back, she shifted as well, placing her massive body between him and the pit, as if to say, "It's done. You may go now." He nodded once, backing away until the trees swallowed him. At the ridge's edge, he stopped and turned. The bear was still watching, her fur glistening under the pale sun. The cub had begun to nurse, safe again in the only world it knew. For a fleeting instant, the hunter thought he saw her lift her muzzle toward him in the faintest of gestures, neither threat nor farewell, but something that transcended both. When he reached his cabin hours later, dusk had fallen. He set his axe beside the door and stood in the threshold, rainwater dripping from his coat. The fire inside had gone out. He didn't bother to relight it. Instead, he looked back toward the dark line of forest and whispered she made it. Far above, on the ridge, the mother bear curled herself around her cub beneath the shelter of a broken tree. The storm had passed, leaving the world quiet and clean. Her body ached, her wounds burned, but she ignored them. The cub's tiny heartbeat thudded against her chest, strong and sure. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of its small body seep into hers. Tomorrow they would move deeper into the mountains, away from the scent of humans and the memory of fear. But tonight, the forest felt different, gentler somehow, as if it too had witnessed their fragile truce. She raised her head once toward the valley below, where faint smoke still drifted from the hunter's chimney. Then she lowered it again and nuzzled her cub, whispering in the language of heartbeats and breath that the wild had always understood. And for the first time in many days, she slept, not as a creature hunted or haunted, but as a mother who had faced the edge of loss and returned with life still in her arms. Dawn crept gently over the peaks, brushing gold across the drenched forest. Mist curled above the trees like memory itself, soft, fleeting, untouchable. Beneath a fallen pine, the mother bear stirred. Her cub slept pressed against her chest, its breath steady now, its tiny paw resting on the scar across her shoulder. The wound had already begun to heal, though the pain would linger, a reminder not of suffering, but of what love had conquered. The forest had returned to its quiet rhythm. The rain had washed away the tracks of struggle, leaving only faint indentations in the mud, a trail that began in blood and ended in mercy. She lifted her head and listened. No cries, no thunder, no scent of fear. Only life, the whisper of running water, the far-off call of ravens greeting the new day. The mother bear rose slowly, her cub scrambling to follow. Together, they moved toward the higher ridges, where the sun broke through the mist in silver beams. With every step, the forest seemed to breathe again, branches dripping light, the ground soft with moss and renewal. She paused once, turning her gaze toward the valley below. From this distance, she could just see the wisp of smoke curling from the hunter's chimney. For a long moment, she watched, ears twitching as if the wind might carry some echo of his voice. There was no fear in her now, only a strange, quiet understanding. The world was wider, more complex than instinct had taught her. There were dangers in it, yes, but also compassion hidden in unexpected places. The cub nuzzled her leg impatiently, tugging her back to the present. She turned away and continued upward. Behind them, the valley grew small, but the story written there would linger, a tale not of prey and predator, but of courage shared between two beings who should have been enemies. When the snow melted completely and new grass rose in the meadows, hunters in the valley would speak of the scarred grizzly who came for help instead of vengeance. Some would doubt it. Others would swear it true. But those who had seen the mountain after the storm would know love leaves traces deeper than fear. And in the hush of that reborn wilderness, the echo of a mother's courage lived on, soft, eternal, and unforgotten.